The chandeliers in Lafair glowed like captured moons. Their light slid across crystal glasses, polished silver, and faces that had never known hunger. Julian Cross sat at the center of it all, the man everyone watched, but no one truly saw. The billionaire CEO wore his confidence like armor. His smile was precise, measured in millimeters. Across the round table sat investors, each rehearsing laughter at his jokes, each aware that one nod from him could change their fortunes. It was a dinner meant to close a global deal, one that promised to reshape markets, as Julian liked to say. In truth, it was another conquest. The air hummed with soft jazz and the quiet hum of ambition. Waiters moved like shadows, silent and efficient. Among them was Amara Ellis, young, focused, invisible. Her steps were steady, her eyes sharp. To her, the restaurant was a living map. Who was nervous, who was lying, who was bored. She noticed things others ignored. The tremor in a man's hand, the sigh behind a laugh, the way Julian's smile faltered when his phone lit up with an unseen name. To the guests, she was part of the furniture. To the story, she was the fuse. Julian lifted his glass. To progress, he declared. The table echoed him in perfect unison. Yet Amara, refilling a glass nearby, caught something else in his tone. Not triumph, but exhaustion. It was the sound of a man who had forgotten what peace felt like. Outside, the city pulsed with rain and sirens. Inside, time felt suspended. Until it wasn't. A sudden clang of metal broke the rhythm. A dish shattered near the kitchen doors. Heads turned, irritation rising. The maitre d' moved to scold someone, but stopped mid-step. His eyes widened. Through the glass doors at the restaurant's entrance, 7 men were advancing. Fast, deliberate, eyes cold. Their clothes were ordinary, but their purpose was not. Amara saw them first. Her breath slowed instead of quickening. Years of instinct, quiet, disciplined, told her this was no robbery. The formation, the precision, the way they moved as one, it spoke of intent, not desperation. Julian didn't notice until the first shout tore through the room. "Everyone stay where you are." The words hit like a whip. Glasses froze midair. The band stopped. Chairs scraped back. A woman's gasp turned into silence. Amara placed her tray down carefully on a nearby table, as if afraid sound itself might break something fragile. Her eyes flicked toward the exit, then back to Julian. He looked smaller now, stripped of his stage. One of the men locked the doors. Another pointed at Julian. "You don't move." Julian tried to speak, but the words caught. The same mouth that once commanded nations of employees now trembled. The investors who had praised him seconds ago now stared through him, each waiting for someone else to act. Amara's hand brushed the cloth at her waist. Beneath it, tucked and forgotten by everyone but her, was a small metal object, light, compact, not meant for serving wine. Her father had called it insurance for unpredictable nights. She had hoped she'd never need it. The tallest of the intruders stepped closer, voice steady. "You took everything from us, Mr. Cross." Julian blinked, as if the man had spoken in another language. The chandelier light flickered, dimmed, then steadied again. The world, polished and perfect seconds ago, now stood on the edge of fracture. Amara's pulse slowed to a calm rhythm. The storm had arrived, and she, the silent observer of power and pretense, would soon decide whether this night would end in tragedy or transformation. The sound of command left Julian's mouth, but no one obeyed. "Stay calm," he said, his voice steady on the surface but trembling underneath. It was the tone of a man who had practiced power for years, until now when it no longer worked. The 7 intruders spread through Lafair like a dark tide. One by one, the guests lowered their heads, not out of respect but out of fear. The room that once buzzed with ambition now echoed with breathing and whispers. Every sound was sharp. The scrape of a shoe, the clink of a dropped fork, the hum of the chandelier above their heads. Julian's eyes darted around the room, calculating. He had negotiated billion-dollar mergers in glass towers and silenced senators with a handshake. Yet here, surrounded by crystal and fear, he felt small. Amara stood near the corner, her posture unchanged. She didn't hide, but she didn't move either. Her hand rested near the edge of her tray. Steady, patient, waiting. Julian's mind slipped backward without permission. He was 23 again, standing in a narrow office with peeling paint and a single light bulb. Back then, he'd believed in innovation, in lifting others as he rose. He remembered promising his first team that their startup would change lives, not ruin them. They had believed him. He had believed himself. Then came the investors, the ones who demanded profit over principle. Slowly, Julian learned the rule of survival. Silence pays. Speak too loudly about fairness and someone richer would replace you. By 40, he had mastered the art of commanding silence. Now the silence commanded him. Empty your pockets. One attacker barked. Another ordered everyone to the floor. Julian hesitated, pride warring with fear. The leader's gaze landed on him, a cold, unwavering stare that cut deeper than any weapon. Julian raised his hands. The gesture was small, but to him it felt like surrendering a kingdom. A cufflink fell from his wrist and rolled across the marble floor. It stopped at Amara's shoe. She looked down, then up, meeting his eyes for the first time. Something passed between them, a flicker of understanding. He saw no panic in her, only focus. She saw no power in him, only the weight of a man finally unmasked. The leader stepped closer. "You built your fortune on our ruins," he said. His voice was calm, almost sorrowful. "Do you remember the plant in Elwood?" Julian blinked. The name hit like a blow. Elwood, one of his earliest acquisitions. The factory had closed after restructuring. Hundreds had lost jobs. He'd signed the papers without reading the final names. The memory surfaced now like a ghost he thought buried. He opened his mouth to deny it, but the words refused to form. His throat tightened with something foreign. Shame. Amara's hand inched closer to the hidden metal beneath her tray. Her breathing slowed to match her heartbeat. She had seen men like Julian before, untouchable until the world touched back. Julian forced his voice out, low and unsteady. "Whatever you think I've done, we can fix this." The leader cut him off with a sharp shake of his head. "You can't fix what you never cared to see." The chandeliers flickered again, their light turning the room into a theater of shadows. For a moment everything seemed frozen. Power and fear balanced on the same knife's edge. Amara shifted slightly. Eyes narrowing, Julian's mask, the calm, confident face he had worn for decades, was cracking. Every drop of authority he'd ever borrowed drained away, leaving only a man who didn't know how to save himself without money. The leader lifted a hand. "On your knees." Julian didn't move, not yet. The silence that filled the room was heavier than before, no longer about control, but consequence. From the corner, Amara watched. Her fingers brushed the hidden object once more. The fracture had begun. The scream of breaking glass cut through the air like a signal flare. Panic surged through the fair. Chairs scraped, silverware clattered, voices turned to frightened noise. Yet in the middle of it, Amara Ellis stood still. Her stillness was not shock. It was calculation. Around her, the 7 men divided the room with quick orders. 2 guarded the door, 3 forced guests to the floor, and 1, the youngest, dragged a trembling waiter toward the center. The leader's voice carried sharp authority. "No one moves until I say." No one did, except Amara's eyes. Her gaze swept the floor, mapping exits, distances, objects that could become tools. Her fingers brushed the folded napkin on her tray, steady and slow. The world around her blurred into movement and noise, but inside everything slowed to rhythm and breath. Then, a sound pierced it all, a child's sob. In the corner near the window, a boy no older than 7 clung to his mother's arm. One of the men loomed above them, his voice cracking as he shouted for silence. When the boy cried louder, he raised a trembling hand as if to strike. That hand froze Amara in time. The memory came back fast. Another night, another cry. A dim kitchen, the smell of metal and rain. Her father, a veteran with eyes hardened by too many wars, teaching her to hold her stance. "Control your fear," he had said. "Fear is loud. Discipline is quiet." He'd taught her how to turn fear into focus, how to see movement before it happened. He'd also taught her when not to fight. That was the night before he left for his last assignment, the one he never returned from. The world had taken him, and silence had followed. Amara had promised herself she would never freeze again. Her father's lessons had not left her. They had only gone quiet, waiting. The boy's sob turned into a scream as the man shouted again. The glass from a fallen champagne bottle rolled to Amara's foot and stopped. She looked down at its reflection, her face calm, her eyes alive. That bottle became her mirror and her line in the sand. Her decision crystallized like a blade in cold air. This wouldn't end the way her father's story had, with silence and regret. She bent slightly, setting her tray aside, her body a coil of quiet readiness. The sound of chaos dimmed until she could hear only her own pulse. Across the room, Julian Cross sat frozen, confusion still written across his perfect composure. He saw her for a moment, this waitress who didn't tremble. Her calm looked out of place among all the panic. The attacker's hand lifted again, and Amara moved. Small, precise, unseen by most. The tide had not yet turned. But something had shifted. She was no longer a bystander. She was the storm waiting behind the still air. The moment cracked. Open like glass under pressure, the leader's voice cut through the tense silence. "Access your account, Mr. Cross, now." Julian sat rigid in his chair, the weight of his reputation clinging to him like armor. He looked at the men surrounding him, rage in their eyes, desperation in their posture, and something inside him refused to bend. His empire had been built on dominance, on never yielding to threats. He straightened his tie as if the gesture could restore order. "You're making a mistake," he said. "You don't understand how any of this works." The leader, a man with gray at his temples and fire in his stare, stepped closer. "We understand enough. Your factories poisoned our water. Your board closed our plant. You signed those papers." Murmurs rippled across the terrified diners. Julian's jaw tightened. "That wasn't my decision, it was economics." The man's face darkened. "Economics doesn't bury children." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The chandelier light trembled across the crystal tables, casting warped reflections of every face, distorted, ghost-like. Amara stood at the edge of the chaos, watching. Her body was calm, but her eyes read the invisible battle, the clash between power and consequence. She could see that both men were right in their own ways. One born of privilege, the other of pain. Both trapped by systems larger than themselves. Julian tried to regain control. "If it's money you want, money." The leader's laugh was sharp. "You think this is about money? You think that fixes what you broke?" Julian faltered. His confidence, once his sharpest weapon, began to dull. Around him, his guests shrank, their eyes lowered. No one defended him. Power, she realized, was loud when it was safe, but utterly silent when tested. The leader motioned to one of his men. "Bring the laptop." A sleek black device appeared on the table, absurdly out of place among the spilled wine and trembling candles. The man's demand was clear. "Open your empire to judgment." Julian hesitated, and in that hesitation, Amara saw the fracture, the thin line between defiance and collapse. Her father's voice whispered in her memory. "You can't fight what you refuse to face." Julian's fingers hovered over the keys. But his pride would not allow him to obey. "I don't answer to criminals," he said. The leader's patience snapped. "And we don't beg to kings." He raised his weapon and the room stopped breathing. Amara's muscles tensed. Every movement of the men was etched into her vision. The trembling of one's hand, the twitch in another's jaw. The child from before whimpered softly in the corner. The leader's voice grew low, almost trembling. "This is your last chance." Julian's voice broke, not in apology, but in arrogance. "You're nothing without people like me." The leader's eyes hardened. His hand steadied. The threat became real. Then, a scream. The sound tore through the room like lightning. A woman had tried to stand to shield her child. One of the attackers grabbed her arm roughly, and the moment spun out of control. The leader shouted, "Stop!" But too late. Panic broke open like a dam. Amara moved before thought could catch her. Her tray clattered to the floor, a flash of silver against marble. In one motion she lunged, sweeping the child and mother to safety behind an overturned table. Her other hand drew the small metal tool from her apron, a compact baton, simple and silent. The first man turned toward her, surprised. She struck once, precise and clean, knocking him off balance. The others froze, uncertain. In that suspended heartbeat, Amara's voice cut through the air. "No one else gets hurt tonight." It wasn't a plea. It was a command. Julian stared at her, bewildered. The same woman he'd never noticed now stood between life and death, her eyes sharper than any weapon in the room. The leader lowered his arms slowly, confusion mixing with recognition. Amara's calm wasn't defiance, it was control. The silence that followed was heavy, trembling at the edge of change. Julian, for the first time in years, felt powerless and, strangely, human. The night had reached its breaking point, and in that fragile balance between violence and reason, one quiet waitress held the power to decide how the story would end. The first crash of silverware was her signal. Amara moved like a shadow cutting through light. The chaos that froze everyone else became her map. Angles, reflections, exits, each one a choice. Years of silence had trained her to act when others stalled. The leader's hand rose again, weapon steady. "Stay down," he shouted. But his words were swallowed by confusion. A tray spun through the air, glinting in chandelier light before striking his wrist with a dull, metallic crack. The weapon slipped, skidding across the marble. For a second, no one understood what had happened. Then they saw her. The waitress, calm, precise, unafraid. Amara's movements were simple, deliberate. She wasn't reckless. She was surgical. One attacker lunged toward her. She sidestepped, sweeping his leg with the base of a serving stand. He hit the floor with a heavy thud. The next man charged, shouting, but she had already moved. A shard of glass reflected the chandelier's light into his eyes, buying her one more second. Her elbow caught his shoulder, forcing him down. The room erupted in gasps and disbelief. Julian Cross, pinned to his chair by fear, could only watch. He had seen boardroom battles, courtroom wars, but never this. A single waitress dismantling chaos. The woman he'd once overlooked now stood like a wall between him and judgment. For a moment, even the intruders hesitated. Amara's voice was steady, carrying across the tension. "No one else gets hurt. Leave now." The leader turned toward her, clutching his arm. "You think you can stop 7 men?" Her answer was quiet. "I already started." He laughed once, a harsh sound, but it faltered. The authority in her tone unsettled him. She wasn't pleading. She was commanding, the kind of control that didn't come from power, but from conviction. Julian's mind raced. The scene was absurd. This woman defending him, the man who signed her paychecks from those he'd once ignored. He realized with a cold sting that the system that had protected him all his life had no meaning here. Money, reputation, security, none could stop what was unfolding. The chandeliers above flickered. Their glow turned the restaurant into a surreal stage. Shadows of fear, outlines of courage. Amara's eyes darted to the far wall. A fire alarm glimmered red behind a pane of glass. She shifted her stance. Timing was everything. The leader barked an order. 2 men advanced. Amara grabbed a linen cloth from a table and snapped it once, sending utensils scattering. The sudden sound, the flash of motion, it confused them long enough. She spun, kicked the chair leg, sending it crashing into one man's knees. Another stumbled over the fallen tray. Julian flinched as a champagne bottle rolled to his foot. The label caught his eye. Victory Reserve. The irony hit him like a slap. This wasn't victory, it was exposure. His empire was being judged not by shareholders, but by fate. The leader shouted again, trying to regain control. But Amara moved first. She hurled the empty bottle toward the light fixture above. The bulb shattered. The room plunged into half-darkness, glass raining like sparks. In that dim, fractured glow, she stepped forward. The remaining men froze, blinded by confusion and adrenaline. Amara stood between them and the terrified guests, her figure backlit by flickering light. "No one wins by hurting the helpless," she said softly. Something in her tone, firm, steady, stripped of fear, cut deeper than force. The leader's hand trembled. His men looked to him, unsure. Julian rose slowly, his confidence gone, his gratitude wordless. For once, he understood the price of silence. A faint alarm whined from the shattered fixture, shrill and piercing, calling the world outside. Sirens, faint but growing, echoed in the distance. The leader's jaw tightened. He signaled his men. One by one, they backed away, retreating toward the shattered entrance. Amara didn't chase. She only watched, steady and still, until the last man disappeared through the doors. The restaurant was silent again, except for the faint hum of the alarm and the broken rhythm of frightened breathing. Julian stared at her, unable to speak. The woman he had never noticed had just rewritten his definition of strength. She met his gaze once, her face unreadable. "You should start fixing what they came for," she said quietly. Then she turned, disappearing into the dim hallway as the sirens grew louder. The night had changed hands, and for the first time, power didn't belong to money, it belonged to conscience. The silence after chaos was louder than the violence itself. Glass crunched underfoot as the police lights flickered. Through the tall windows of Le Fer, the guests, once elegant, now pale and trembling, were led out one by one. The chandeliers still swayed, as if the building itself was trying to steady its breath. In the corner, Julian Cross sat slumped, his once perfect suit torn at the cuff. The billionaire who had commanded entire markets now looked like a man staring into a mirror he didn't recognize. Across from him, 2 officers restrained the wounded leader of the attackers. His arm bled through his jacket, but his voice remained clear. "I need to speak," he said. To him, Amara stood between them, her eyes sharp but calm. She nodded once. "He'll listen." Julian didn't move. His silence wasn't strength anymore, it was avoidance. But Amara's gaze held him there, as if she were holding up the weight of the truth he had spent years ignoring. The leader exhaled slowly. "We worked for you once. Elwood Manufacturing. You remember that name?" Julian blinked. A faint memory stirred. Contracts, meetings, figures scrolling across a screen. "That was years ago," he said. The man's voice grew tight. 5 years. You closed the plant, shipped the jobs overseas. Promised restructuring. You called it progress. The word progress hung in the air like smoke. He continued, his tone steady but lined with pain. "You never saw what came after. The houses we lost. The children who got sick from the waste your company left behind. You turned us into a number on a report and erased us when it didn't balance." Julian opened his mouth, then closed it again. The language of denial failed him. Amara watched his face, reading every flicker of realization. She had served him champagne, heard his careless jokes about profit margins and tough decisions. She'd known there were people behind those numbers. She just never expected to meet them like this. The leader's words grew quieter. "We didn't come to kill you. We came to make you see us. That's all we ever wanted." He looked toward Amara, and she's the only one who actually did. Julian's eyes dropped to the floor. The marble reflected his own image, distorted, fractured, surrounded by shards of crystal. For the first time, he felt the full weight of what his empire cost. Amara stepped closer. "You built walls to keep the world out," she said softly. "But walls don't stop truth. They just delay it." Julian looked at her, and for a fleeting moment the distance between Billionaire and Waitress disappeared. They were simply 2 people standing in the wreckage of choices, one made by power, the other by courage. The officers began to lead the attackers away. The leader paused at the door and turned back. "Fix what you broke," he said, "or someone else will." When the doors closed behind him, the silence returned, heavy, thick with consequence. Julian ran a hand through his hair, staring at the overturned tables and shattered glass. This restaurant, once a shrine to his success, now felt like an exhibit of his failure. Amara picked up a fallen napkin and set it neatly on the nearest table. The gesture was small, but it felt symbolic, restoring order after ruin. Julian finally spoke, his voice low. "I didn't know." She looked at him, unblinking. "You didn't want to." Outside, sirens faded into the city night. Inside, only the faint hum of broken lights remained. For the first time in his life, Julian Cross sat in silence and listened. The flash of cameras looked almost holy against the broken glass. By dawn, Le Fer was no longer a restaurant, it was a scene. Police tape cut across the marble entrance, yellow lines dividing what was once luxury from what was now truth. Reporters filled the street, shouting questions that echoed against the tall windows. Was it political? Was it revenge? Who was the waitress? Inside, the air smelled of cold metal and disinfectant. Officers moved through the room taking statements, their radios whispering in short, clipped bursts. The chandeliers, still swinging faintly, cast fractured light across faces drained of sleep. Julian Cross sat at the same table where the night had broken. Only now, it looked smaller. His empire reduced to spilled wine, a cracked plate, and his own shaking hands. He had survived the attack, But survival didn't feel like victory. Across the table, the napkin she had left was still there, folded once, precise, untouched by the chaos around it. One word written in pen: listen. It stared back at him like a verdict. Reporters pressed against the glass, cameras flashing. Someone said he'd been a hero, others said a victim. None of it felt true. The real story was quieter, heavier, the kind of truth that didn't make headlines because it couldn't fit in a soundbite. Julian replayed the leader's words again and again. You erased us. For years. He had measured success in numbers, profits, markets, votes of confidence. He had told himself that losing a few meant saving many. Now, sitting in the wreckage, he saw that every number had a face. Every report had a name. Every cut had a cost. Outside, the world was spinning faster. Police vans pulled away. Reporters called out predictions. One said, the CEO's reputation won't recover. Another said, he'll make this a redemption story. Julian didn't care about redemption, not yet. He cared about silence, the kind he'd used to build walls, the kind Amara had broken. He looked up as a detective approached. Sir, you're free to go. You should get checked by a medic. Julian nodded but didn't move. His eyes were fixed on the napkin. Did anyone see where she went? The detective shook his head. The waitress. She left before we got here. No one knows her name. It's like she disappeared. Julian almost smiled. That sounds like her. He picked up the napkin, folded it carefully, and slipped it into his jacket pocket. It felt heavier than paper, like a promise. Through the shattered glass doors, the morning light began to creep in, soft and gold, spilling across the broken floor. It was the same light that had once glinted off his awards, his trophies, his headlines. Only now it felt different, honest, unfiltered. He rose slowly, the weight of the night pressing on his shoulders. Amara Ellis had walked away with nothing. No fame, no credit, but she had left behind something stronger than proof. A reminder, a warning, challenge. Outside, as Julian stepped into the cold air, a reporter's microphone appeared in front of him. Mr. Cross, what do you have to say about the attack? He paused, his voice low but steady. It wasn't an attack, he said. It was a message. The reporter blinked, confused. From who? Julian looked back at the restaurant, at the faint reflection of himself in the glass doors. From the people we stopped listening to. He turned and walked away, the city waking around him, his empire no longer invisible but fragile, human. Inside, the napkin's message echoed in memory, simple and final. Listen, and for the first time in his life, he did. The morning sun rose over the city like a verdict. News vans lined the street outside Le Fair. The world wanted answers, but the truth wasn't soundbite material. It was quieter, heavier, still unfolding beneath polished headlines. Julian Cross stood before the cameras, his suit pressed, his voice measured. The reporters waited for the familiar tone of certainty, the kind that had once built his empire. But something had changed. His confidence now felt rehearsed, his pauses too long, his smile uncertain. Last night, he said, was a tragedy, but also a turning point. I've seen the damage caused by choices made in comfort and ignorance. That ends now. Flashbulbs burst like fireworks. The crowd leaned closer. I pledge to rebuild every community my company abandoned. Real jobs, real reform. His words were the right ones. But his eyes, those sharp, ambitious eyes, betrayed doubt. Behind the promises lingered a question he didn't yet know how to answer. Can a man who bought silence truly learn to listen? Amara Ellis wasn't there to hear it. She walked through the morning streets away from the chaos, her uniform folded neatly in her arms. The city moved around her, buses roaring, vendors shouting, life resuming as if the night hadn't happened. But for her, it had changed everything. Freedom didn't always feel light. Sometimes it felt like carrying a secret too big for words. She stopped at a corner bakery and watched through the glass as a boy helped his mother sweep the floor. The simple act brought a faint smile to her lips. Ordinary life, the thing worth protecting, worth fighting for. She pulled a worn photo from her pocket, her father in uniform, standing beside a flag he believed in. His expression was quiet, proud. Beneath the photo, faint writing read, "Serve without reward." Amara folded it back into her coat and kept walking. Weeks turned into months. The headlines changed. The chaos faded into memory. L'Affaire reopened, quieter now, under new management. The crystal chandeliers still shone, but the guest list had changed. Julian kept his promise, or at least tried to. The restaurant now employed men and women from Elwood. The town, his decisions once destroyed. The grand dining hall was no longer a symbol of distance, but of return. Reporters called it a redemption arc. Investors called it a pivot, but those who worked there called it something simpler. A chance. Julian visited once a week, not to be seen but to learn. He sat at the corner table, the same place where his world had broken, and listened. He listened to their stories, their laughter, their anger. Each one chipped away at the wall he'd built around himself. And sometimes, when he glanced toward the door, he half expected to see her walk in again, the quiet waitress with the steady eyes and the unspoken grace of someone who had already moved on. He never did. Amara had vanished into the rhythm of the city. She didn't seek credit, didn't want headlines. Her story wasn't built for fame, it was built for meaning. She understood something Julian was still learning. Courage doesn't end when danger passes. It begins afterward, in the choice to keep walking with conscience intact. On one quiet evening, long after the last guest had left, Julian found her folded napkin again. The word she'd written, "listen," had faded at the edges, but its meaning hadn't. He placed it in his wallet next to his company ID, where it would remind him daily of who he had been and who he could still become. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the dark, like 1,000 small chances for redemption. Amara walked somewhere beneath them, recognized, unseen, yet unforgettable. Sometimes, courage doesn't end the story. It begins one. The video began with silence, no music, no narration, just the raw sound of chaos inside L'Affaire. Shouting, glass breaking, the unmistakable calm of a woman's voice saying, "No one else gets hurt tonight." Within hours, it was everywhere, on news feeds, social media, boardroom screens. A waitress standing between violence and power. A billionaire saved by the person he'd never noticed. And the world noticed. Inside a glass-walled conference room, 40 stories high, Julian Cross sat across from his board of directors. The same men and women who once praised his control now spoke in cautious tones, rehearsed in damage control. "Public sentiment is volatile," one of them said. "The clip's framing you as the villain, Julian." A symbol of greed, he didn't answer. The word villain echoed in the sterile room like truth bouncing off marble. Another voice added, "We could spin this, turn it into a redemption narrative. New community funds, worker reforms, quick wins." Julian looked up. "Quick wins don't change anything," he said quietly. The room fell silent. For the first time, he wasn't strategizing for profit. He was thinking about faces, workers from Elwood, the leader's trembling voice, Amara's steady eyes. He reached into his jacket and unfolded the napkin he'd kept there. One word, fading but still clear. "Listen." The symbol felt heavier now, like a mirror held to everything he'd ignored. "I'm done talking about spin," he said. "We'll rebuild from the ground up, transparently. The people we cut out will sit at this table." A few directors shifted uncomfortably. "That could alienate investors," someone warned. Julian met their gaze. "Then maybe we finally find out who's here for profit and who's here for purpose." The statement hung in the air, shocking in its honesty. The same board that once feared his anger, now feared his awakening. Later, as he walked out of the meeting, the hallway monitors replayed the viral footage again. The clip paused on Amara's face, calm, focused, unflinching. Beneath the video, a comment had gone viral. "This isn't just her story. It's ours." Julian stopped, watching the reflection of his own face beside hers on the screen. Wealth beside humility, arrogance beside courage. For the first time, the contrast didn't shame him. It guided him, because truth once heard doesn't echo for applause. It echoes for change. And in that quiet, echoing moment, Julian finally understood what Amara had meant all along. Listening was not the end of redemption. It was the beginning of it.